All right, so the last one we're going to be talking about here is the Penn Central, and I guess the predecessor really is the Pennsylvania Railroad, and I have a couple of other certificates, and what I'll do is I'll make sure I throw them up on the video while we're going. So we have, I guess this is probably one of the early ones. Here's the Pennsylvania Railroad, and I think this one's probably from, let's say, the mid to late 30s, and then here we have, this is another Pennsylvania Railroad. In addition to being one of the more, I guess, recognized or prominent pieces in the game of Monopoly,
That's right.
it was very instrumental in the growth of the country. So the certificates I just showed you, those are a little bit older certificates. The certificates that you'll have in your packet may be a mix of this is sort of this Penn Central company was sort of the last gasp consolidated effort in order to reorganize, I think.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly, and I'm trying to find out what the predecessor railroads were that led up to the Penn Central. I don't know.
So I have here the Penn Central Railway was formed by the merger of the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central
Right.
in 1968, and that was the successor to, that was Cornelius Vanderbilt's
Exactly.
firm as well, okay? And what I'll do is as we're talking, I will throw up a certificate of the
Penn Central, Grand Central Station. and all
Correct,
those other
exactly. Not just the Pennsylvania Railroad, but the New York Central Railroad. And there's a real common certificate with that one as well, with Cornelius Vanderbilt on it,
Right.
who is another, character in the whole
Definitely.
story in terms of the history of the United States and kind of the growth of the United States as well. So that one was, those two companies merged to form this Penn Central company, and again, we're talking about sort of the benefit to society here, right? As these businesses grow, they're taking capital from individuals, they're deploying that capital by building rail lines, building trains and rail cars and stations. I mean, there are a lot of stations that have even survived today. But as you alluded to when we were talking about General Motors, I think it was really the automobile that kind of ended up sort of challenging.
Taking market share.
Yeah,
away from
it ended up challenging and really ended up doing in the Penn Central. So the Penn Central ultimately goes bankrupt. I think it is, what is it, 1972? I
Something
think it
like
is.
that, yeah.
I'll have to
And the
double check.
airlines heard them as well.
Yeah, but I think the car. I mean, when you talked about the interstate, so instead of having large quantities in a centralized location, I mean, granted there were spurs and whatnot on these rail lines, but the cars and trucks could now go literally, almost door to door in this particular case. And now with an interstate system, we had the infrastructure to do that.
Exactly.
And again, this was also it was a kind of a pretty heavily regulated industry, and then this competition really kind of came fast and furious, and I think they were unprepared because of the amount of money that they had borrowed. So why do you think that this particular business is important to the history of the United States?
Well, the history of the United States, it wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for the railroads connecting the west to the east and building the track all the way across the country, being able to move people, manufacturing equipment, all kinds of things. You wouldn't have had the gold rush like you did and things like that had it not been for the railroads to be able to transport everybody.
Yeah.
Although most of the railroads weren't built until that was 1849. So a lot of them, I take that back on the railroads because they came around by ship, a lot of the people, to go to the
as soon as
gold rush,
the early, but after the Civil War.
Exactly, and because of the gold rush,
Yeah.
then the railroads started getting more money because it started bringing the traffic across the country to build the railroads. And the railroads did a lot in building the country and connecting it up, and those places that had stops along the way flourished, and those places that were far away from the railroads where the stations were didn't flourish as well because people couldn't get to them as easily.
Yeah, and I think, kind of just to build on what you were saying, it's a lot like the airplanes, So before the airplanes, we had these railroads, and if you didn't have if you lived in an area where there was no railroad, it could literally take you weeks to travel from one town
Exactly.
to another town. And by having the railroad, would have cut down the, your, by having the railroad, it would greatly reduce the amount of time that it would take to, move from one part of the country to another part of the country. And again, I think it's a similar type of theme with the airlines. The local municipality, they would invest in having a station. Then in most cases, the town or city would prefer to have a station rather than not, so that that town could flourish and have access to goods and resources as well. And a lot of those investments, I think, even still survive today. The Penn Central does survive on in New York, in Newark, in Baltimore, in Chicago, and I think Union Station, was a Penn Central stop as well. Union Station in Washington D.C. as well. So what happened to the Penn Central? What were the surviving entities for the Penn Central?
CSX. And well, I mean, basically, the railroads as you see them today. I don't know if Conrail was part of.
I think
Penn
Conrail
Central.
was. I definitely know that there was a long corridor, which is all Amtrak now.
It's all Amtrak.
That was
right.
all. Basically, Amtrak runs on all those old lines.
There's very few companies. They're all using the track that was developed by Penn Central. That's for sure. And whether or not it's the same kind. A lot of the companies, the assets were sold off. The routes were being bought out by other companies, and they were just totally dissolved. But trains did survive, but it was a much smaller type of transportation system than it was at one time because of the economics. There was just too much competition from other sources, from the automobiles, from the planes, from the ships, trucks and whatnot. So it really hurt them. One interesting point that I was thinking of that I was looking at is that I was reading the other day on how these big airplanes that they're building now that have these private exclusive suites on the airplanes. And it made me think of the palace cars, in the 1860s, 1870s.
Yeah, the Pullman, there was a whole business in and of itself.
Absolutely, a Wagner Palace Car Company and things like that. And they had these cars that were just like first-class cars. And then the people who were really wealthy had their own train car. So what they would do is, when they wanted to travel, they would hook up their train card to the train. They'd have total privacy. They'd have all their things set up there, their telegraphs and everything they could to get all the information they can. And it was just fascinating when you think about, more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And in terms of like standard of living, or it's like, would you, as a person today, would you rather travel in your own train car, or would you rather travel by train? Right? Would you rather have the modern technology, or would you rather have
travel by plane?
Right. Would you rather have modern technology, like say the train, or would you rather travel in high luxury, but you're on an unair conditioned rail car?
Right.
So it is interesting. I mean, it's, how these sort of differences in time, affect your judgment about kind of what luxury, or what I mean, as the standard of living has changed.
Standard and status has changed.
Yeah, that's
people who have a lot of money always find ways to spend it. And back then they were buying their own railroad cards. Now they buy their automobiles,
or even their own planes,
and their own planes and everything else.
Planes,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so so we just covered a little bit briefly the history of these three particular companies. I have to say, being a little, I like to, I'm always trying to improve what I'm doing here, and I think if I were to do this again, I think I probably would have started with the Penn Central, and then maybe we should have moved on to the automobile, and then maybe we should have done, in terms of technology, that probably would have been a better way to do it. But I guess
we'll just play the tape backwards.
Yeah.